Hello, dear one. You've carried so much today. So many thoughts, so many silent aches, so many unspoken prayers. But now you're here. This is your time to breathe, to rest, to be still in the arms of the one who never left. In these stories, we won't rush. We'll walk slowly. We'll listen gently, and you'll hear again what your heart has always known. You are not alone. You are held, and Jesus is near. So close your eyes if you wish. Let go and come rest with him. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. Isaiah 40:11. There was a little white house at the edge of the hill country, quiet as a breath held in stillness. It wasn't remarkable. Paint peeling gently, wind chimes whispering at dusk, and on its front porch, an old rocking chair, moving only when the breeze remembered it. Inside that house lived a woman named Miriam. Miriam was 82 and had stopped counting birthdays after 79. She said the numbers no longer mattered, only the light that touched the window each morning, the same light her husband once sat beneath, the same light her grandchildren used to dance in years ago, the same light that still arrived, faithfully, though most everyone else had stopped coming. Her days were filled with small, quiet rituals. A cup of tea warmed in a pale blue mug, a hymn hummed beneath her breath, the feel of wool under her fingers as she knit prayers into every stitch. Sometimes she talked aloud, to the Lord or to the memories, and every evening she'd sit by the front window just before twilight and whisper, "I'm still here, Jesus." That was her rhythm. The stillness, the waiting, the quiet belief that someone holy was near, even if no footsteps ever crunched down the gravel drive. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. You see, Miriam had lived a full life, children raised, church casseroles made, hymns sung at weddings and funerals alike. But in this last season, she felt invisible, as if her voice only echoed off empty walls, as if her worth had folded itself into soft silence. And yet, the shepherd had not forgotten her. Bedtime takeaway. You are not forgotten. The shepherd sees you, even in the quiet. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Psalm 23:2-3. That night, the wind was gentle. It came down from the hills like an old friend, brushing through the branches of the pecan tree in Miriam's yard. The house creaked a little, not from age, but as if sighing, settling into its evening prayer. Inside, Miriam lit a candle. She always did this at night, not out of necessity, but reverence. Something about a single flame glowing in the dark reminded her of hope, of how even the tiniest light can warm a room, can speak to the soul. She sat down in the old rocking chair, wrapped a faded quilt around her legs, and listened, not for voices, not for visitors, but for him. Sometimes, in the stillness, she would remember moments from long ago, the way her mother used to sing hymns while hanging clothes on the line, the crackle of fried okra on Sunday afternoons, The feeling of her husband's hand in hers, rough and reassuring, even when words ran dry. But on this night, it was different. She wasn't looking back. She was looking inward. A question had begun to settle on her heart like dust on the windowsill. Had her life been enough? Had she given what she could? Loved as she ought? Been faithful in the ordinary days that passed without applause? She didn't ask the question aloud. She didn't need to, because something stirred. Not outside, not in the trees, but deep within her spirit. It was a presence, soft, unhurried, holy, like a shepherd walking beside her again. Take a deep breath. Let yourself be still. The candle flickered, and Miriam found herself whispering again, but this time not to fill the silence. Jesus, if you're near, stay a little while. No thunder, no voice from heaven, but peace, like warm honey, filled the room. A sense that her life had not been forgotten, that every small kindness, every unseen offering, folded linens, answered phone calls, prayers prayed for distant grandchildren had been gathered by God like wildflowers in His arms. Even her loneliness was not wasted. It was being woven into something eternal. She could almost feel His robe brush the edge of her grief. He was there, not to fix her past, not to promise tomorrow, but simply to be with her now, to sit beside her, to rock beside her, to keep vigil with her soul. Bedtime takeaway. You don't have to prove anything. God delights in simply being with you. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Exodus 33, Vers 9. The night had deepened. Outside, the wind had settled into a hush, and the trees no longer rustled. Only the soft hum of crickets sang in the distance, like a lullaby composed long ago for the weary and waiting. Inside the house, the candle still flickered gently beside Miriam. Her eyes had grown heavier, but she did not yet sleep. Something sacred was stirring in her, a quiet she hadn't known in years. She had always thought of God as distant, glorious, and holy. Yes, but far off, dwelling in the heavens, while she dwelled in days of dishes, arthritis, and phone calls that never came. But here, in this hour, in the hush between wakefulness and sleep, he felt close, closer than breath. She didn't need to do anything to reach him. She only needed to be still, and so she sat, letting her heart rest, letting all the questions she had carried about the years behind her, about the children who rarely called, about the friends who'd gone ahead, slowly loosen their grip. She didn't need answers. She needed presence. Rest here. Take one long, slow breath. Let it out gently. The rocking chair creaked softly under her weight, and for the first time in a long time, Miriam smiled, not a smile of happiness, but of trust. She thought of the shepherd, not as the one who chased after the strays, but as the one who waited beside the ones who could no longer walk. He didn't ask her to rise. He didn't ask her to pray the perfect words. He simply came and sat like a friend, like a savior who knew the longings of the elderly heart. She leaned her head back and whispered, "You've stayed. Thank you." The candle glowed, the room sighed, and Miriam closed her eyes, not to escape, but to rest, wrapped not in sleep, but in nearness. The shepherd was there, not because she had earned him, but because he had always promised he would be, even here, even now, even in the quiet. Bedtime takeaway. God's presence is not something you chase. It is something you receive. He is already here. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Psalm 139:5. It had been many years since Miriam had sewn a full quilt. Her hands, once steady with the needle, had grown slower. Her eyes, once sharp, now blurred the edges of the threads. But on her lap tonight lay her last finished piece, a faded patchwork quilt, soft as breath, warm with old prayers. Each square carried a story, one stitched from her wedding dress scraps, one from her son's flannel shirt, long outgrown, one from a curtain her daughter had once hidden behind while playing, and in the center, a plain ivory patch, embroidered only with the word "with you." She had sewn that one the winter after her husband passed, a season when loneliness had poured in like cold rain, and she had found herself whispering into the dark, "If you're still with me, Jesus, just give me something to hold." That quilt became the answer, not a miracle, not a solution, but a soft covering, woven with grace. She ran her fingers over it now, the edges worn from time and use, the stitches still holding strong, and somehow the fabric remembered for her every season of her life, wrapped gently in cloth and promise. It was more than a blanket. It was a memory of presence, a quiet assurance that God had not missed a moment. Breathe softly now. Let the warmth of memory cover you, too. As she sat, quilt wrapped around her, she began to hum, not for any reason, just an old tune one her mother used to hum while folding towels or slicing apples in the kitchen. Something simple, something safe, the kind of melody that seemed to rise up from the bones when the soul was too tired for words. Her hum filled the room like incense, fragile, fleeting, but fragrant, and though her eyes were closed, she imagined the shepherd sitting beside her once again. Only this time, he was humming too, matching her note for note, not louder, not above her, just with her, and somewhere in her soul, she felt it. The Lord remembered everything she'd forgotten, the silent prayers, the quiet griefs, the laughter that had faded into empty rooms. It was all there, wrapped up in grace like that old quilt. He had seen it all, and he had stayed. Bedtime takeaway. Nothing in your life has been overlooked. God has stitched every moment into the story of his love for you. I lie down and sleep. I wake again, because the Lord sustains me. Psalm 3:5. It was full night now. The stars blinked quietly above the hills, soft and unbothered, like little lanterns held out by angels to guide the souls of the tired. The sky, dark as velvet, seemed to press gently on the windows of Miriam's house, inviting her, beckoning her into a deeper stillness. Inside, the candle had nearly burned down to the base. Its last light danced faintly against the wall, flickering as if it, too, were breathing, slow and low. Miriam had not spoken in a while. She didn't need to. The presence of Jesus was so near, so quiet and safe. It made even her thoughts slow their pace. There's something holy that happens when the world grows silent. It becomes easier to hear what's always been true, that you are loved, not for what you've done, not for how strong you are, but simply because you are His. She had spent so many years giving, caring for others, volunteering at church, showing up even when her heart felt hollow. And in all those faithful offerings, she had rarely stopped to simply receive. But tonight, she was learning the rhythm of receiving, of letting her breath soften, of letting her bones grow heavy with trust, of letting herself lean. And so she leaned back into the chair, back into the hush, back into God. Pause here. Let your body soften into where you are. No striving now, just rest. In the gentle dark, she imagined again that she wasn't alone in the room. She didn't see Him with her eyes, but she felt Him with her spirit. The shepherd, seated beside her, not rushing, not speaking, just watching over her like a fire that never goes out. And slowly, slowly, she allowed herself to sink into it, not into sleep, not yet, but into something deeper, a kind of trust that doesn't need to understand everything, a kind of surrender that knows she's already held. She whispered only one word into the stillness: stay. And in the sacred hush that followed, she heard an answer, not with her ears, but with her soul. I never left. Bedtime takeaway. You can rest now. The one who holds the stars is holding you. 2. Even to your old age and grey hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. Isaiah 46:4. The candle finally gave its last flicker and went out. Miriam didn't stir. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing even, slow. But she was not quite asleep. Not yet. She hovered in that holy place between waking and rest, a place where everything grows soft, gentle, true. The quilt rested around her shoulders like a blessing, and inside her, a quiet prayer rose wordless, formless, not made of sentences, but sighs. It had no shape, but it reached heaven just the same, a kind of soul breath, an offering wrapped not in eloquence, but in honesty. And that was enough, because the shepherd understood the language of the heart. He always had. Breathe in. Feel the hush of night settling around you like a friend. Let it hold you. Miriam's lips parted just slightly. No sound came, but in her heart she whispered, "I am tired, but I'm not afraid." The fears that had once crept around her in the night, the what-ifs, the regrets, the ache of being forgotten had fallen away, not because she had solved them, but because they no longer held her. She was being held by something far greater. Someone. She pictured herself now, not as a woman in a rocking chair, but as a lamb lying down in green pastures beside still waters, safe under the shepherd's watch. It wasn't imagination. It was faith, remembering what the body sometimes forgets, that God's promises are not only for the young or the strong or the certain. They are for the ones who tremble, for the ones who wait, for the ones who have grown old in the arms of grace. You, too, let your soul lie down beside still waters. You do not have to carry yourself anymore. The house was quiet now, not empty, not hollow, but full of the presence of the holy, full of remembered faith, full of the nearness of Jesus, who never once turned away. And as Miriam finally let herself drift into sleep, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just peace, but belonging. Like a child safe in her father's house. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need words tonight. The shepherd already knows your heart, and he's staying close. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Lamentations 3:22-23. Somewhere far off, a bird began to sing, not loudly, not as a cry to the morning, just a few tender notes, as if creation itself was whispering, "He's still here." The dawn had not yet arrived, but something within the air had shifted. The hush of night was softening, as though the world was taking its first slow breath again. Inside the little white house, Miriam still rested in her chair, head tilted gently to one side, hands folded beneath the quilt, a look of peace on her face so deep it seemed to hum through the walls. The candle had long gone out, but there was no need for flame because the light was coming, and not just the sun. Pause here. Let your spirit rise with the quiet of the sky. No need to rush, just receive. In her dreams, or perhaps beyond them, Miriam walked again. Not the way she walked in her youth, not hurried, not driven, but slow, unburdened, as if each step was stitched with joy. She was on a path she had never seen, and yet it felt familiar. Soft earth beneath her feet, gentle wind across her shoulders, and ahead, always ahead, the shape of the shepherd, never too far to reach, never too near to overwhelm. He did not rush her. He only turned now and then and smiled, as if to say, "I've waited so long for this walk." There were no clocks here, no mirrors, no aches, only presence, only peace, only a kind of knowing that runs deeper than thought, the knowing that you are finally where you've always been meant to be. Take a deep breath. Let that image stay with you. You are walking with him, even now. Miriam stirred slightly in the chair as morning finally broke. Golden light crept across the floorboards like a promise. The breeze touched the hem of the quilt and lifted it softly, almost like a blessing being passed over her shoulders. Her eyes didn't open. They didn't need to. She had seen what she needed to see. She had heard what she needed to hear. And now she simply rested in it, wrapped not just in cloth, but in memory, in mercy, in Him. Bedtime, takeaway. Even the first light belongs to God, and He gives it to you. As a reminder, His love has not left you, not in the night and not in the morning. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. The light had grown fuller now, not harsh, not loud, just warm, like sunlight filtered through lace curtains, draping the room in gold. It touched the bookshelf, the wooden floor, the quiet hands resting beneath the quilt, and it touched Miriam. She didn't wake, not in the way we think of waking, but her spirit stirred gently, like a flower unfolding to the morning. And Jesus was still there. He hadn't moved, hadn't stepped away when the candle went out, hadn't disappeared with the fading stars. He had stayed, because love does not visit, it abides. Let your breath rise like the light, soft, unforced, holy. There was something about the morning. Miriam had always believed. It was the time when hope felt possible again, when the mercies of God arrived, not in trumpet sounds, but in small things, the chirp of a single bird, the soft ache in bones that still meant you were alive, the warmth of tea against an old mug. But this morning was different. This morning felt like forever, because the presence that had come to her in the night hadn't faded with the dawn. It had deepened, and Miriam, even in the quiet stillness of her body, was more alive than she had ever been, not because anything had changed on the outside, but because on the inside, everything had come to rest. You don't have to chase peace anymore. Let it come to you like morning light. If anyone had passed the house that morning, they would have seen only stillness, an old woman sleeping in her chair, a quilt wrapped around her like a prayer, a candle long gone out. But heaven saw something else. Heaven saw a daughter held, a heart made whole, a life gathered gently by the shepherd who keeps every promise even in our final sleep. And heaven rejoiced, not with loud voices, not with applause, but with the quiet joy of a father who had brought one of his children home, not in death, but in love. Because when we rest in Jesus, we are never far from home. Bedtime takeaway. You are already in His arms. This moment, this breath, this stillness is part of forever. The eternal God is your dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. Deuteronomy 33:27. The house was still. Sunlight stretched across the floor now, warm and unhurried. The wind outside had settled into a hush. and the trees stood gently, as if watching over something sacred, and within, Miriam rested, fully, quietly, completely. There was no fear in her face, no weight left in her chest, only peace, only the calm that comes when the shepherd himself has whispered, "You don't have to carry it anymore. Take one more breath, let it fall softly. You are safe here, in the mystery of sleep, in the quiet that held her." Miriam had returned to the heart of what had always carried her, not her strength, not her faithfulness, not even her memories, but God's love, that constant, gentle presence, the one that sits beside rocking chairs, the one that wraps quilts around weary shoulders, the one that waits patiently through years of silence and longing until the soul is finally ready to rest. This wasn't the end of Miriam's story. It was simply the beginning of the part that never ends, the chapter where tears are wiped away, not by time, but by His hand, where loneliness is no longer a shadow, because she is never alone again, where everything that once felt unfinished is made whole. Beloved soul, let this be true for you as well. The shepherd who stayed with Miriam stays with you too. He is closer than breath, more faithful than memory, gentler than any human hand. You do not have to rise. You do not have to pray the right words. You do not have to be anything other than here. Just rest and let Him hold what you can't. Final bedtime takeaway. You are not alone. The shepherd has found you, and He will never let you go. Take a breath. That was beautiful, wasn't it? You didn't have to do anything to be seen tonight, and you still don't. Let's stay here a little longer. There's another quiet story waiting just ahead, and it's just for you. There was a window in Ruth's house that faced west. It didn't look out over anything grand, just the same gentle hills that had rolled there long before her time. Some days they were golden and dry, like old parchment. Other days they glowed green, brushed by spring's quiet breath. But always they stood still, like sentinels of a story still being told. Ruth sat by that window every evening now, a blanket over her knees and a mug of warm milk cooling on the table beside her. She didn't sip it much anymore. The comfort came from the holding, not the drinking. She had been widowed for 16 years. Her children were scattered. Her body had grown slow, her memory softer. But this window, this place at the edge of the day, was where she remembered who she was, and sometimes who God still was. Pause here. Let the quiet enter with you. Ruth didn't talk much anymore. Her voice had grown quiet, like the rest of her, but she prayed in little ways, by folding laundry slowly, by touching the cross that hung above her window, by whispering thank you to the evening light, even when the day had been long and aching. And each night, without fail, she'd murmur the same 6 words into the air. You see me, don't you, Lord? Not desperate, not demanding, just a question. gentle and raw. There had been seasons when Ruth had done so much, raised 3 boys, taught Sunday school, cooked for funerals, held the hands of the grieving, stayed up late listening to her husband breathe after long days at the mill. But now, her days were different. Slower, quieter, sometimes too quiet. She no longer measured her worth by what she could do. But sometimes she still wondered if her stillness meant she had been forgotten. Yet, even in that wondering, she kept returning to the window, because somehow, even without answers, it always felt like God met her there. Bedtime takeaway. Even if the world forgets, God remembers. He sees you. Still, you are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. Psalm 32:7. That evening, the wind curled softly around the eaves of the house. It was the kind of wind that felt like a memory, gentle, familiar, and full of something just out of reach. Ruth sat still, her hands resting in her lap, the blanket slightly slipping from one knee. She didn't move to adjust it. She was listening. There was no music in the room, no radio playing, no clock ticking loud enough to count the time. But in the silence, something old returned. A song, not sung with words, not heard with ears, but it came. A tune from long ago. A lullaby, maybe, or a hymn her mother used to hum while brushing her hair at bedtime. Something sacred in its simplicity. And Ruth didn't try to name it. She only let it come. Let it rise. Let it soothe. Take a slow breath. Listen for the quiet song beneath your thoughts. The song moved gently through her spirit, brushing against places that had not been touched in years. The ache she felt in her knees, the emptiness in her arms, the long loneliness of the kitchen table, they all softened under the notes. It wasn't the song itself that held power. It was the one who had remembered it. Ruth realized, without trying, that it had been the Lord's melody all along, a lullaby not lost to time, but saved for this very evening. And though she couldn't sing anymore, not the way she used to, she opened her mouth and whispered a single word in rhythm with the tune. Here, that was all she said. That was all she could say. But it was enough, because heaven always hears the heart more clearly than the voice. And God, like any good shepherd, comes closer when his sheep whisper from the still places. The air was cool now, brushing softly through the cracked window. Ruth closed her eyes. She didn't drift off, not yet, but her body began to trust the stillness again. She was not forgotten. She was not useless. She was heard. Bedtime takeaway. God hears even the quietest part of you. Your song, your sigh, your silence, all of it reaches him. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. Psalm 77:11. It had been years since Ruth opened the drawer beneath the window seat. She kept it closed most of the time, not because it was painful, but because it was sacred. Some things, she believed, are best visited only when the heart is quiet enough to honor them. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the old song had stirred something, and her fingers, without quite knowing why, reached toward the handle. The drawer slid open with a small sigh. Inside were letters, yellowed and worn, photographs, black and white, a pressed daisy from her wedding bouquet, a recipe card with her mother's handwriting, smudged by time and butter, a baby shoe, the laces still tied, and near the back, a small notebook with a cracked leather cover. She hadn't opened it in a long while. It was her prayer journal, not the one she kept on the kitchen table now, where she scribbled names and needs. This one was older, full of entries written in the margins of her younger years. She opened it slowly. Page after page, her past greeted her. Prayers written in rushed handwriting, some desperate, some grateful, all honest. Lord, help me get through this week. Thank you for Jimmy's laugh tonight. Please don't let the baby be sick again. Are you still there? She smiled through tears. Not sadness, not even regret, just awe at how much she had lived and how much God had carried her. Take a moment now. Let memory come not to haunt you, but to bless you. Let it show you where God has walked. Ruth ran her fingers along one particular page. It was dated 38 years ago. Dear Lord, I'm so tired. Please help me not feel invisible. She traced the words, and it was as if the Lord had waited all this time for her to return to this page, to remind her, you are never invisible to me. The notebook trembled in her lap, not from fear, but from the weight of grace. He had heard her all those years ago, and he was still hearing her now, even as her strength faded, even as her voice grew quiet, even as her world had grown smaller. His love had not shrunk with time. It had deepened. It had stayed. Bedtime. Takeaway. God remembers every page of your story, even the ones you've forgotten. Nothing is wasted in His hands. For you, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. Psalm 18:28. The room had grown dim. Evening had folded itself around the house like a shawl pulled gently across the shoulders. Outside, the hills were no longer visible, just the faint outline of trees standing quietly against the sky. Ruth set the notebook aside and reached for the little lamp by the windowsill. It had always been her favorite, a small brass lamp with a linen shade and a warm amber glow, a wedding gift. Once, lit nearly every night for years, she clicked it on. A soft pool of light fell around her chair, the notebook, her hands, and something else arrived with the light. Not a sound, not a vision, just a stillness that carried more than silence, a presence. Ruth sat very still. She didn't move, didn't speak. She didn't want to disturb whatever was happening. It wasn't frightening. It was tender. She felt as though someone had entered the room, not through the door, but through the soul. And he sat with her, not above her, not beyond her, with her. Pause here. Let yourself feel the warmth of light against the darkness. God is here now, just as he was then. Ruth leaned back slowly into the chair, letting the light from the lamp brush her face. She closed her eyes. She did not need to see him. She knew the Lord was in the room, not because she had summoned him, not because she had earned him, but because he had always come. Whenever she lit that lamp during storms, during lonely nights, during years of sorrow, he had come quietly, faithfully, like a father who doesn't knock but already has the key. And now, even in her old age, even with memory sometimes fading and hands sometimes forgetting what they once knew, he remembered her. Let that truth rest on your heart. You don't have to understand everything. You only have to be held. In the glow of the lamp, Ruth felt her soul soften. She didn't pray with words. She didn't reach for scripture. She just breathed. And in that breath, God met her. He didn't need her to be wise or useful or strong. He only wanted her heart, offered in stillness, and she gave it again. Bedtime takeaway. God comes not just in daylight, but in the soft glow of your quiet moments. He is sitting beside you. Even now, whoever is kind to the needy honors God. Proverbs 14:31. The lamp hummed quietly, casting a gentle golden glow across the room. Ruth's fingers rested softly on the arm of the chair, her body wrapped in a knitted shawl her friend Marlene had made for her years ago. Marlene had long since passed, but the shawl still held warmth, as if woven with memory itself. It reminded Ruth of something, not a memory that came often, just a small moment from years ago. A cold, February morning. A woman with a toddler standing in line at the post office. Not enough coins in her hand. Not enough strength in her face. Ruth had stepped forward, smiled, and quietly paid for the postage. No one had noticed, not even the woman who had been too flustered to say more than a quick thank you. But Ruth had remembered her. She had gone home that day with tears in her eyes, not because she had done something remarkable, but because something in her heart had opened. She had felt the nudge of God's love move through her, so gently, so quietly, and she had responded. She hadn't thought of that moment in years, but tonight, with the lamp beside her and the Lord near, the memory returned, not as a boast, not as proof, but as comfort. Take a breath. Let the kindness you've offered, whether remembered or forgotten, return to your heart like a blessing. Ruth realized something as the memory settled into her chest. God had not only seen that act of kindness, he had kept it, like a seed planted in sacred soil. And that was just one. There had been so many others. Moments she had long forgotten. Letters written, meals delivered, tears quietly shared, prayers whispered for neighbors she hadn't seen in years. She hadn't done them for recognition. She had done them because love was in her bones. But tonight, she understood something new. God had remembered them all, even the ones she never told anyone about, even the ones she thought didn't matter. In heaven's eyes, every cup of water given in His name had been received by Him. And that thought, so simple, so quiet, brought tears to her eyes, not from regret, not from sorrow, but from wonder. She had not lived a wasted life. Even now, in stillness, she was held by the fruit of a life rooted in mercy. Bedtime takeaway. No act of kindness is ever lost. God gathers them all and remembers you by your love. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Not long after the lamp had been lit, the sky began to whisper. It started as a hush against the roof, barely there. Then came the gentle tapping of rain on the windows. Not a storm, not thunder, just a steady, patient rhythm, like fingertips of grace tracing every surface of the house. Ruth didn't look away. She kept her gaze fixed just beyond the window pane. She had always loved the rain. Even as a little girl, she would press her face to the glass and watch the drops race each other down, as if heaven were gently weeping joy upon the earth. And now, all these years later, it still calmed her. There was something sacred about rain. It asked for nothing. It explained nothing. It just came, and it reminded her of God. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the sound of rain settle into your breath. This is how God often speaks softly, steadily, without needing to be loud. Ruth let the silence return between each drop. She didn't pray. She didn't try to fill the air. She simply listened, and in the quiet of her heart, she heard a different kind of voice, not made of words, not audible to the ears, but clear all the same. It was the voice of the Lord, not booming from the heavens, but wrapped in stillness. He was saying what she needed most to hear. You don't have to figure it all out. She felt those words settle over her like the rain, because there were still questions inside her about why some prayers had gone unanswered, about why her husband had passed so early, about why her children lived so far away, and why their voices grew fewer on the phone. She had carried those questions like folded letters she was too afraid to open. But now, she realized she didn't need the answers anymore. Not if the Lord Himself was holding her. Let go of your questions now. You don't have to carry them into the night. They're safe in His hands. The rain continued. Ruth leaned her head back, let her breath slow, and for the first time in a while, she let herself feel peace without needing to earn it. She didn't need to understand. She only needed to be still, because stillness, she was learning, was not the absence of activity. It was the presence of trust, and trust was worship. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need all the answers to be at peace. You only need to know the one who holds them. He gives His beloved sleep. Psalm 127:2. The rain continued like a lullaby outside Ruth's window, soft and sure, a steady grace falling from heaven. The lamp still glowed faintly, and the notebook remained open in her lap. But Ruth had drifted now, not all the way into sleep, just far enough to leave the weight of the day behind. Her breathing slowed, her hands softened, and in the hush, a dream began to unfold. Not wild or strange, just gentle, familiar, like something she had always known, but forgotten until now. In the dream, she was walking through a quiet field. The grass was tall, moving like waves. The air was sweet. The sky was wide and kind. And beside her was a man. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew it was him, the shepherd, Jesus. He walked beside her, not rushing, matching her pace, not speaking right away, just being near. And know how near he felt. Take a deep breath. Let yourself walk there too. Feel the quiet ground beneath your feet. Feel the nearness of the one who has always known your name. In the dream, Ruth didn't ask questions. She didn't feel the need to explain her life or account for her pain. She just walked, and he walked with her. That was enough. There were wildflowers in the field, the scent of lavender and rosemary, birdsong in the distance, the kind that makes the soul feel whole again. And still, he walked with her. After a while, he turned toward her and finally spoke. "Do you know how proud I am of you?" The words stopped her heart in the best way. She had never thought of God being proud of her. She thought of him as holy, good, patient, but proud. "I didn't do that much," she said, her voice like a child's in the breeze. But he only smiled. "You loved," he said, "when it was quiet, when it was hard, when no one saw. You loved, and I saw every moment." Tears filled her dream eyes. He stepped closer and touched her shoulder, not heavy, just enough to steady her. "You did not waste your life, Ruth. You gave it, and I received it. Let those words fall over you now. You did not waste your life. You gave it, and I received it." They walked on a little farther, until the field began to glow not with sunlight, but with something softer, almost like the warmth of 1,000 remembered kindnesses, gathered together and turned into light. Ruth smiled. She didn't need to know where they were going. She only needed to stay beside him. And so she did. Bedtime takeaway. When you love quietly, God sees loudly. And one day, he will walk beside you and say, "I was with you the whole way, but I will sing of your strength. In the morning, I will sing of your love, for you are my fortress, my refuge in times of trouble." Psalm 59:16. The rain had stopped. Outside, the hills were washed in pale gold, clean, hushed, tender beneath the weight of morning. The sky held the color of old linen, and the world, it seemed, had paused between night and day, not wanting to disturb the peace still lingering over the earth. Inside the little house, the lamp still glowed faintly, though the dawn had taken its place. Ruth stirred. Just slightly, a small exhale, a blink, the slow remembering that she was not alone. She looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The blanket was still over her knees. The window was still cracked. The notebook was still resting in her lap, as it had been. And yet, everything felt different. Pause. Let your soul feel what Ruth felt. Not new circumstances, but new assurance. A stillness that runs deeper than anything this world can shake. She didn't rush to stand. Her body still ached. Her hands still shook. But something in her posture had softened. The night had not removed her burdens. It had revealed a deeper truth. She didn't carry them alone. She remembered the dream if it was a dream. The field, the shepherd, the words spoken in love. And she held them close, like a warm cloth folded over the soul, like a secret between her and heaven. She didn't need to tell anyone. The shepherd had spoken. That was enough. She turned her gaze to the window once more. The hill sat quietly as ever, and Ruth, now wide awake, did not feel restless. She felt steady because she knew now, with a deeper certainty, that the shepherd did not leave at sunrise. He stayed through pain, through quiet, through days when her name wasn't called by anyone else. He still called her his, and in that, she could live another day. She could rest again that night. She could whisper prayers for children she rarely heard from, because she was not living for applause. She was living in the presence of love. Bedtime takeaway. Even when nothing around you changes, the presence of God can change everything within you. She gave this out of her poverty, but she put in everything she had, all she had to live on. Mark 12:44. Later that morning, Ruth stood in her kitchen. She moved slowly, carefully, as always. The kettle warmed on the stove. The mug she always used, chipped just slightly on the rim, waited beside a jar of honey. The light from the window fell across the floor in golden bands. It was an ordinary moment, but it did not feel small, because Ruth no longer believed that quiet things were unimportant. She had spent her whole life inside the quiet, and now she knew God had been in every part of it. Every meal cooked, every corner swept, every name written in her prayer book, every whispered song while folding laundry, every "I'm still here," Lord, spoken into an empty room. None of it had gone unnoticed. Take this moment to be still. Let the ordinariness of your life feel sacred again, because it is. God is in it, all of it. She sat down with her tea and pulled the notebook back into her lap. It was strange, she thought, how something as simple as writing a name in prayer could change the shape of the day. She didn't write in straight lines anymore. Her handwriting wobbled like an old vine, but she still wrote. Today, she added a new prayer, not for healing, Not for strength, not for any particular outcome, just a quiet line. Thank you for walking with me in the quiet. And under it, another. Let my life be a soft light. Even now, she set the pen down. No one else would read those words. But she had learned something in her years, especially in these recent quiet ones. Heaven reads every line, and heaven remembers what the world forgets. The widow's 2 coins, the old woman's prayer, the night of rain and stillness, the morning that came with no parade, but with presence. All of it was seen, all of it was gathered. Let yourself feel that now. Your life does not need to be loud to be holy. Ruth leaned back, tea in hand, warmth in her chest. There was so much she could no longer do, but she could still love. She could still bless. She could still trust. And for the rest of her days, however long they were, she would live with this quiet vow to stay close to the shepherd who had never once left her side. Final bedtime takeaway. You are deeply known. You are quietly loved. And nothing about your life is small to the one who made you. You're still here, and the shepherd is still near. What you're feeling now, that soft warmth in your spirit, that's him. Let's listen together again. There's another gentle soul waiting in the next story. Their quiet life might sound a little like yours. There was a small cottage at the edge of town where the trees grew thick and leaned in close, like old friends. It had no grand sign, no visitors anymore, just a mailbox with peeling paint and a wooden gate that creaked when the wind shifted. And inside lived Esther, 87, thin hands, a voice that had once taught classrooms full of children, now barely raised itself above a hush. She didn't need much anymore. A bowl of soup, a soft shawl, a warm place for her Bible to rest, and most of all, quiet. She had grown to love the quiet, even though it was heavy at times, even though some nights it settled on her chest like a weight. She would sit near the window, the one that faced the oak tree, and whisper only 3 words before bed. Are you there? No thunder ever answered. No voice broke through the ceiling. But she kept asking, because something deep in her knew he was. Breathe in now. Let that question settle in your chest, not with fear, but with hope. Are you there? Yes, he is. Esther didn't have the strength she used to. Her fingers trembled when she turned the pages of scripture. Her legs ached when she stood too long by the stove. Her memory, though mostly sharp, had begun to flicker in places, and yet she still lit a small candle each evening, still set her cup of tea beside the window, still waited, not for answers, but for nearness. She didn't need God to fix everything. She only needed to know he hadn't forgotten her. And somehow, each night as she closed her eyes, even when nothing around her changed, she felt something. Not a presence she could name, but a warmth, a hush, a knowing. The kind of peace that slips in like breath. The kind that doesn't announce itself, only holds you. And maybe that was the answer. Not words, not signs, just being held. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need to understand everything tonight. It is enough to know you are already held. He has remembered his love and his faithfulness. Psalm 98:3. Esther woke early, as always, not because she had somewhere to be, not because an alarm rang, but because her heart had learned to rise with the quiet. The light was pale, barely brushing the edges of the curtains, the kind of soft light that didn't demand attention, only offered itself like a whisper, gentle and faithful, the way the Lord always had been. She sat for a long time before standing. There was no rush, no urgency. The day could wait. She reached for her Bible, old and worn, its spine cracked in places, the pages marked with the ink of years. Tucked between the Psalms and Isaiah were prayer cards, some decades old, some names she still prayed over. Others had long gone home, but she never threw them away. Not a single one, because to Esther, a prayer once spoken lived on. Even if the words faded, God hadn't forgotten. Pause. Take a deep breath. Think of someone you once prayed for. Their name still echoes in heaven. Her hand landed on one card, nearly torn at the edge. It read, Jason, age 9, trouble sleeping, worries too much. Jason was her grandson. Back then, he would cry at night, afraid of shadows on the wall and storms that never came. Esther used to sit beside him and stroke his hair and whisper, Jesus is near, sweetheart. He doesn't leave when it's dark. He was grown now, a man with children of his own. They didn't speak much these days. Life had stretched everyone thin. But still, she prayed. Still, she believed. Because prayers, she had learned, don't have expiration dates. They don't rely on memory or proximity or even time. They're planted in eternity, watered by faith, and answered by a God who holds everything we forget. She placed the card back into the Bible and closed it gently, as if tucking a child into bed. And then, with the smallest smile, she whispered, You still remember, don't you? She didn't need a sign. The peace in her chest was enough. Bedtime. Takeaway. God remembers every name you've ever whispered. Even when you forget, He keeps praying with you. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. Psalm 56:8. It was nearly afternoon now. Esther had moved to her chair beside the fireplace, where the light fell long and soft across the rug. She held a mug of chamomile, but it had long since gone cool in her hands. She didn't mind. She wasn't thinking about the tea. Her thoughts had wandered back to a day she didn't speak of often. A day long past years ago now, when she had stood in the hallway outside a hospital room and heard the words no mother should ever have to hear. They had lost the baby. She remembered the way her knees had nearly given out, the sterile smell of the hospital, The kind nurse who touched her shoulder, the clock on the wall that seemed to tick louder than her own heart. It had been winter, and inside her chest, it stayed winter for a long time. Take a breath. Let yourself be still with her. Some memories are quiet, not because they are small, but because they are holy. Esther didn't cry that day. Not until later. Not until the house was empty and the night had come. And even then, the tears came quietly. She remembered sitting at the edge of her bed, a blanket around her shoulders, whispering not a prayer, but only one soft ache. Why? No answer came. Not that night. Not for years. But what did come was a presence. Not loud, not sudden, but steady, like the hush that falls when someone enters the room and doesn't speak, just sits with you. That's how it was. God had sat with her, and somehow she had gotten through it, not all at once, but moment by moment, held by grace she couldn't name at the time. And now, as she sat in her chair, all these years later, she knew He had kept every tear, not as a record, but as remembrance. Not one had fallen unnoticed. Let that truth settle in you now. Your sorrow was never silent to Him. Not then, not now. She took a sip of her tea. It was cold, but her heart was warm, because even that loss, even that hollow space had become a place where she met God, and not as an idea, not as theology, but as the one who stays when no one else knows how. Bedtime takeaway. You are not forgotten in your grief. Even your quietest tears are held in the hands of God. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. Job 8:21. It had been a hard winter that year, the kind that came early and stayed too long. Frost on the windows every morning, bread dough slow to rise, silence thick in the house after everyone had gone. Esther had just begun learning how to live alone. She moved through her days like a ghost, completing each task as if it belonged to someone else. There was no joy in it. Not then. Just habit. Just breath. Until the afternoon the bird flew in. Take a soft breath. This part of the story is lighter but no less sacred. She remembered it clearly. A sparrow, small and trembling, somehow got trapped inside the cottage. It must have come through the chimney, or maybe the window she'd cracked open for the scent of pine. However it arrived, it panicked, fluttering from shelf to shelf, knocking over a jar of buttons, sending a small cascade of fabric swatches across the floor. Esther gasped at first. Then she laughed. Not a little laugh, not a polite one. A real, belly-deep, unexpected laugh. It bubbled out of her like water breaking through stone. She hadn't laughed like that since before the hospital, and it caught her off guard. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief, because somehow, in the wildness of a bird's wings, God had opened a window in her spirit. He hadn't fixed everything, but He had cracked something open. Joy had found her. In a cottage that had grown quiet, in a heart that had forgotten how to sing. And that laughter, though the moment passed, never really left. It became a seed planted in her, a quiet memory that rose like spring when sorrow tried to harden the soil. Let yourself smile now. Yes, even in the quiet, God still plants joy where grief has grown. She had released the bird that day with gentle hands, watched it dart out the door and into the trees, and ever since, she kept a small wooden sparrow on her mantle, not because she needed the reminder, but because she liked to glance at it sometimes and whisper, "You brought me back that day." Though really, she knew it wasn't the bird. It was him. Bedtime takeaway. God has not forgotten how to make you laugh. Joy is still possible, even after sorrow. Even now, my soul waits in silence for God only. From Him is my salvation. Psalm 62, 1. The sun had dipped low behind the trees. Its golden light, once stretched across the room, had slowly faded into blue, then grey. Now, only the lamp remained its soft glow brushing Esther's walls like the hush of a lullaby. She folded her hands in her lap. The day was finished. Nothing dramatic had happened. No one had visited. No letters in the mail. No phone calls. And yet, her heart was full, because the silence that wrapped around her wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't loneliness. It was presence. It was God. Pause with her now. Let your heart grow still. This is where peace begins, not in sound, but in being seen. Esther moved slowly through her evening. She placed her cup in the sink, turned down the lamp, touched the edge of the wooden sparrow on the mantel, then made her way to the bedroom. Each step was small, gentle, like part of a sacred ritual. She had learned that the quieter life became, the more room there was to hear Him, not in words, but in the way the quilt felt soft between her fingers, in the way the floorboards creaked like familiar music, in the way the night came, not as a threat, but as a blanket. She pulled back the covers and sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, hands resting on her knees. No words needed to be said, no list of requests, no apology for the things she didn't get done today. She just breathed, and in that breath, God breathed with her. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. There is nothing required of you right now, except to rest. Esther whispered a final prayer, barely audible. Thank you for the quiet. And as she lay down, pulling the quilt over her shoulders, she did not feel the silence as emptiness. She felt it as fullness, as if all of heaven had leaned in to keep watch through the night. She knew the shepherd was near. She didn't need proof. His peace had filled the room. Bedtime takeaway. You are not alone in the silence. God fills even the quietest corners with His love. I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43, 1. Sleep came gently. No struggle, no tossing, just the slow surrender of breath. As Esther let go of the day and gave herself to rest, she didn't dream often anymore, But this night, she did. And in the dream, she was walking through a meadow, the kind she remembered from childhood, wildflowers dancing in the breeze, sunlight touching her shoulders, no pain in her knees, no weight in her chest. The world felt wide and kind, and beside her walked a man, not a stranger, not quite. She couldn't see his face clearly, but his presence filled her with something so familiar, so gentle. It made her breath catch in her chest. He didn't need to introduce himself. She knew. She had always known. It was Jesus. Pause with her now. You are not imagining this peace. You are remembering it. He didn't speak. Not at first. He just walked beside her, slowly, matching her pace. She noticed how still everything felt. Not frozen, just unhurried. There was no need to explain, no need to look back. They walked past a tree she recognized from long ago, past a path that curved just like the one near her grandmother's house. And with every step, she felt lighter, less burdened, less forgotten, more herself. And then he turned toward her. His face was calm, his eyes full of a knowing that went far deeper than memory. He said only one sentence, "I have never stopped seeing you." And something inside her crumbled in the best way. Tears came not from sadness, but from the quiet relief of being known completely. Let this truth settle in your spirit. You have never once lived a moment that Jesus did not fully see. Esther reached for his hand. It was warm, not like a dream, not like imagination, but like something real, more real than waking. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everything in her had already been heard, and they kept walking, not toward a destination, but simply together. That was enough. That had always been enough. Bedtime takeaway. God doesn't need you to explain yourself. He knows you fully and loves you completely. Awake, my soul, I will awaken the dawn. Psalm 57:8. The light returns slowly, soft and silver. It crept through the sheer curtains and touched the floor with quiet reverence. It filled the room not as a command to rise, but as a gentle invitation. You are alive again today. Come and be held. Esther stirred beneath the quilt. She did not open her eyes right away. She didn't rush to leave the dream behind. Instead, she let it linger. The meadow, the quiet walk, his voice. I have never stopped seeing you. She carried that sentence into the waking like a pearl held close to the heart. It had not been just a dream, not in the ordinary sense. It had been a remembering, a visitation, something holy. Pause here. Let your breath soften. Let the light in your room feel like grace on the floor. You too are being gently awakened by love. Eventually, Esther sat up. Her body moved slowly, as it always did. There were aches and stiffness, but something in her chest felt new, as if the shepherd from her dream had left a blessing folded between her ribs. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, touched her feet to the rug, whispered her first prayer of the day, not crafted or eloquent. Just, "Thank you for staying." That was enough. She didn't need to re-enter the dream, because the truth of it had followed her into the morning. He was still here, not in the meadow this time, but in the room, in the light, in her breath. She shuffled to the kitchen, put the kettle on. The click of the flames sounded like a psalm. Everything felt quieter now, but not empty. She didn't feel the need to fill the space with noise, because peace had taken up residence in the silence. Take another breath. Let the ordinary feel sacred again. The same Jesus who walked beside you in the dream walks beside you now. She sat by the window, tea in hand. A bird flew by. The leaves danced, and for the first time in days, her hands stopped trembling. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been for years, not even on the hardest nights. That old ache in her bones, even that was being held. And as the light filled her little kitchen, she smiled to herself and said softly, "He walks with me. Bedtime or morning takeaway. The presence that comforts you in dreams stays with you in the waking. You are never truly alone. Even to your old age and grey hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you." Isaiah 46:4. The tea had cooled in Esther's cup. She didn't mind. She rarely drank it quickly. It wasn't about the warmth or the flavor anymore. It was about the pause. The pause was what made it holy. She watched a shadow pass along the garden fence outside. Probably a squirrel or the neighbor's orange cat. But she didn't get up to look. She simply sat and breathed and let the day move without rushing to meet it. It had taken years for her to learn this rhythm. Years to stop apologizing for being slow. Years to stop calling her quiet days unproductive. Years to understand that slowness is not failure. It's invitation. Invitation to be attentive, to move with intention, to listen not only to God but to her own soul. Take a moment here. Let your heart slow down. It's not behind. It's simply being invited to move with grace. Esther picked up her Bible again, not to study, not to get something out of it, just to hold it, to let her hands rest on its pages, to feel once more how the word had carried her. She turned, without aim, to the Gospels. The story of the bleeding woman caught her eye. 12 years she had suffered. 12. And yet, Jesus did not rush past her. He stopped. He turned. He called her daughter. Esther closed her eyes. That's what she was feeling now. That same kindness. Jesus was not in a hurry. Not with that woman. Not with her. He matched her pace, walked beside her, sat with her through the days when walking felt too much. And in this season of her life, he was teaching her all over again that grace has no speed. It only has presence. You don't need to catch up. God is not ahead of you. He's right here, in your slow, sacred pace, Esther placed the Bible in her lap and whispered, "I'm still moving. Lord, just slower now." And deep inside, she heard the tender reply, "That's more than enough." Bedtime takeaway. God does not measure your worth by how fast you go. He walks with you at the pace of love. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders. 1 Thessalonians 4:11, 12. Evening returned softly. The clouds wore lavender now. The sun stretched long shadows across the wooden floor. The wind, barely there, nudged the curtains like a gentle breath from heaven. Esther lit her lamp. She always did this, not out of habit, but out of reverence. The glow was steady, not bright, not flashy, just enough to make the darkness feel kind, just enough to remember that light does not need to shout to be strong. She moved slowly again, folding the small blanket over the edge of her chair, washing her mug, setting the old devotional beside her bed, and before she turned down the covers, she paused. She looked around the room. This small, quiet house, the same walls she had prayed inside for decades, the same furniture she dusted hundreds of times, the same window where she watched for light. There were no crowds, no celebrations, no headlines, but she saw it clearly now. This life, her life, had been an offering. Every small act of care, every whispered prayer, every quiet forgiveness, every silent faithfulness, it had all risen like incense before God, not wasted, not forgotten, but gathered into something holy. Pause here. Let your own quiet life come into view, not to judge it, but to bless it. God already has. Esther slipped into bed, the quilt soft against her skin. She lay on her side, facing the lamp. Its warm circle of light touched the page of the Bible on her nightstand. She didn't need to read tonight. She had been living the scriptures for years. Her breath slowed, her eyelids softened, and just before she drifted off, she whispered the same 3 words she always did. "You're still here." And he was, as always, in the quiet, in the breath, in the sleep that came like mercy. Final bedtime takeaway. Your life, quiet, steady, slow, is a gift to God. He sees it, He blesses it, and He is still right here. You've made it this far. Through prayers, tears, old letters, and glowing candles, one more story remains. Let's end the night with the peace we were made for. Come closer. The shepherd is ready to carry you home. It was a narrow valley, quiet and hidden, nestled between 2 rolling hills like a folded page in the landscape. The trees leaned in gently from either side, and the little brook whispered over smooth stones, always moving, never loud. And beside that brook lived Thomas. He was 84 now. His house had once been filled with voices, Sunday lunches, children with grass-stained knees, laughter echoing off kitchen walls. But now it was just him and the wind and the shepherd. He never saw him, not with his eyes, but he knew the shepherd was there. The way you know a coat still holds your warmth, the way you know a song without needing to sing it, the way you know someone has stayed, even when everyone else has gone. Pause here. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders soften. The shepherd is near you too. You don't need to see him to be safe. Each morning, Thomas would sit on the wooden bench outside his porch and whisper, "Still here, Lord," not as a question, not even as a plea, just as a statement of fact. Still here, still breathing, still waiting, still his. And each evening, as the sun folded into the hills, he would sit again and whisper, "You too, right." It was the kind of conversation formed from years of faith, not dramatic, not urgent, just steady. And that was the rhythm of Thomas's life now. Silence, whisper, presence, like walking through a meadow with no path and still knowing exactly where you're going. He didn't have many plans anymore. He had peace, not because his story had been easy, not because the questions had all been answered, but because the shepherd had never left his side. Not once. Bedtime takeaway. You don't need to see the shepherd to be held by him. He walks with you, even in the silence. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. The next morning came slow and quiet. The sky was painted with mist, the kind that clung to the fields and softened the lines of everything it touched. Thomas stood at the back window, cradling his mug in both hands. He didn't drink much coffee anymore, but the warmth in his palms helped him greet the day. He watched the fog curl around the trees. It reminded him of something, or rather, someone. Her name had not been spoken aloud in a long time, but inside his heart, it still echoed like a hymn from a pew that never quite emptied. Her name was Lillian, his wife, his best friend, gone now for 17 years. Breathe slowly. Let your own memories surface like soft light, not to grieve again, but to remember that love never really leaves. Thomas didn't cry much these days, not because the pain was gone, but because the pain had changed. It had softened, settled, become something like a scar, the kind you run your fingers over and whisper, "I remember." She had gone quietly, the way she lived. No dramatic goodbyes, just a hand held tight, a forehead kiss, a whispered, "I'll wait," and then the stillness. For a while after she passed, he had tried to fill the space. He cooked for two, set out her cup in the mornings, kept her gardening gloves on the back porch hook. But eventually, the ache wore into something different. He learned to stop filling the space and instead let it become sacred. Because what he realized, what God gently taught him, was that loss doesn't mean absence. Not when love has been folded so deep into your days. Lillian was no longer across the table, but she was still in the light that warmed the tablecloth, still in the prayers whispered over dinner, still in the way he sat with the silence and let it become company. And the shepherd, he had not stepped back during the grief. He had stepped closer, closer than breath, closer than memory. And this morning, as Thomas watched the fog drift across the field, he felt it again. Not pain, not sorrow, but nearness. Take a moment. Let your own grief become a place of quiet reverence. God is not far from that ache. He is inside it, healing, holding, staying. Thomas walked out to the porch, the wooden planks cool beneath his slippers. He sat on the bench and closed his eyes. Morning, Lord, he whispered. Then, after a long pause, tell her I said hello. The shepherd didn't answer in words, but a breeze passed across his shoulders, gentle and warm. And Thomas knew that prayer had already been heard. Bedtime takeaway. Grief may stay, but so does God. And love, real love, doesn't disappear. It becomes part of your breath, and God holds it all. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. It was mid-morning now. The sun had crept higher, slowly burning off the fog. The field beyond Thomas's porch lay open and golden. Bees moved lazily through the garden. A bird called out from the willow tree. Inside, the house was still just the ticking of the small wooden clock above the fireplace. Thomas sat in his chair, the old Bible open in his lap. The cover was worn smooth, the corners curled from years of use, verses underlined with faint ink, margins filled with tiny handwriting, a lifetime of mornings and evenings, pages turned with hope, and sometimes trembling. He didn't read as quickly anymore, didn't try to finish whole chapters. He just sat with the words, let them breathe, let them be. That morning, his eyes fell on a single verse. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He read it twice, then a third time, and he remembered. Pause here. Let those words settle over you like a soft blanket. He turned to me and heard my cry. There had been years when it didn't feel that way. Long stretches when he prayed and nothing changed. When the illness lingered. When the job was lost. When one of his sons stopped calling. He had cried out, sometimes in the middle of the night, fists clenched under covers, sometimes into a pillow so no one would hear, sometimes just in silence, looking up at a ceiling that seemed too far away. But what he saw now, looking back with aged eyes and a healed heart, was that every prayer had been heard. Not always answered the way he wanted, but heard, and more than that, held. God had never been absent, not once. He had sat beside him in the dark, waited patiently when Thomas didn't know what to say, wrapped every unanswered question in something greater than answers. Presence. Let yourself rest in that truth. God may not always speak the words we long for, but He always stays. And sometimes, staying is the holiest thing of all. Thomas ran his fingers over the page. He thought about the prayers he still prayed for his children, for his neighbor whose wife was fading, for peace in a world too loud to listen. And he didn't worry if the answers would come soon. He just whispered quietly, "You've heard them all, haven't you?" And in the stillness of that room, he felt it again, that subtle, steady warmth. The shepherd wasn't standing at the door with solutions. He was already inside, holding every word Thomas had ever spoken, even the ones he could no longer remember. Bedtime takeaway. You've never prayed into an empty room. Even the quietest cries are caught by the shepherd, who never stops listening. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13:2. The afternoon was beginning to fold into itself. Sunlight shifted lower on the walls. The leaves cast long shadows across the porch. Thomas had returned to his chair by the window, the Bible still open on his lap. He had drifted for a few moments, half reading, half remembering when it happened. A knock, soft, barely there. 3 gentle taps on the front door. Thomas blinked. He hadn't had a visitor in nearly 2 weeks. Most deliveries were left at the gate, and those who knew him well rarely came without calling first. He stood slowly, carefully, his knees no longer hurried. He opened the door, and there, on the step, stood a young woman, early 30s, maybe, wind-chapped cheeks, eyes kind, uncertain. In her arms, a paper bag. "Hello," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope I'm not intruding. I live just down the road well, a little further past the bend. I made too much stew this morning and thought maybe you might like some." Pause here. Let the kindness of this moment wash over you. God speaks in whispers and sometimes in stew. Thomas smiled slowly. He didn't recognize her, but something in her voice felt familiar, gentle, hesitant, like someone who had once needed kindness and remembered how it had felt. "Well," he said, "I was just wondering what I'd do about supper." She smiled back. He stepped aside. "Would you like to come in for a moment if you're not in a rush?" She hesitated. "Just for a bit. I should get back soon." They sat by the window. He offered her tea. She declined, but she stayed. And in those few minutes, they spoke like old friends, about nothing and everything, about the weather, the garden, the smell of bread baking from her open windows. Before she stood to leave, she said quietly, "I used to walk by your house with my father years ago. He told me you were the man who prayed for everyone." Thomas chuckled. "Didn't know I had a reputation. He said the whole town was covered by your prayers, even the people who never asked." She looked down. "I think maybe I was one of them." He didn't need to say anything. The shepherd had already said it. Years ago, in every quiet prayer Thomas had ever breathed into the walls of that house. And now, some of those prayers had returned in the form of a knock, a paper bag, and a stew too large for one family. Let this rest gently in your soul. What you give to God in secret, He multiplies in grace. Thomas watched her walk down the path, bag in hand, scarf fluttering behind her. Then he closed the door, sat down again, and looked up at the ceiling. "You're sneaky, Lord," he whispered, "but I see you." And he smiled. Bedtime takeaway. God often answers prayers through people. And sometimes, what you once gave in love will return to you, carried in the arms of someone you never expected. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. Evening had come gently. The golden light outside had deepened into amber, then rose, and now into a quiet slate blue. The wind moved softly through the trees, rustling the last of the leaves on the old oak beside the house. Thomas didn't turn on the overhead lights. He preferred the hush of a single flame, so he lit a candle. It was an old habit now, something he'd begun years ago. Back when Lillian was still here, she had always said, "A candle makes a room feel like it's listening." He believed that. So each evening, as the world grew dark, Thomas lit the small candle by the window, not for light, but for company. Pause with him now. Feel the hush settle around you. Let the flame speak softly in your soul. You are not alone in this room. The flame flickered, and the room responded. Shadows leaned gently into corners. The wooden beams above seemed to exhale. Even the clock seemed to tick more softly, and Thomas felt it again. That presence, not loud, not sudden, but full, deep, like someone had entered the room and sat beside him just to be near. He didn't speak right away. He just watched the flame. There were no great burdens tonight, no cries for healing, no desperate prayers, just a desire. Stay with me, Lord. That was it. And in return, peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything in order, but the kind that arrives when you realize God is with me, even here, even in the quiet, even in this small house on the edge of the hills, even at the end of an ordinary day. Take a slow breath. Let the candlelight warm your chest. You don't need words to be with him. You only need stillness. Thomas leaned back in his chair, fingers relaxed on the arms. The candlelight danced across the Bible on the table. He could almost hear a hymn in the silence. And then, almost without meaning to, he began to hum, low and quiet, the same tune Lillian used to hum while folding laundry on rainy afternoons. Abide with me. Fast falls the eventide. And he knew he wasn't just humming to remember. He was humming with the shepherd beside him. Bedtime takeaway. God comes not just when you cry out, but when you light a candle and simply whisper, "Stay with me." And he does. Come to me. all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. The candle burned quietly. Its light leaned across the table, touching the rim of the old mug, the edge of Thomas's Bible. The photo frame turned inward on the shelf, still upright, still present, but long ago, faced away. There had been a time when Thomas couldn't look at that picture. It wasn't a stranger's face. It was his youngest brother, Joseph. They had been close once, inseparable as boys, partners in mischief, bonded in loss when their father passed, but somewhere in their 30s, something broke. Words were said, wounds opened, and they didn't speak for the last 22 years of Joseph's life. Breathe slowly now. There is no rush to forgive, but God gently waits with us as we remember. Thomas shifted in his chair, eyes tracing the soft outline of the frame. He hadn't moved it in a long time. He didn't need to. It wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't even about undoing the silence. It was about laying the weight down. For years, he had carried it: regret, grief, the if-onlys. He carried them through holidays, through church services, through birthdays when he stared too long at the phone that didn't ring. And he prayed, not dramatic prayers, just the same whisper, over and over again. "Lord, what do I do with this ache?" For a long time, there was no answer, just a quiet waiting, a slow softening, until one night, maybe 15 years ago now, he had lit a candle, just like tonight, and instead of praying for his brother to say sorry, he prayed for peace, not Joseph's, his own. He said aloud what he had never dared to speak before: "I forgive you." Then, even quieter, "Forgive me too." And that was the beginning. Not the end of pain, but the end of bitterness. Pause here. Let your own burdens come to the surface. They are not too heavy for Jesus. They are not too old for healing. Thomas didn't need to change the photograph's direction. It had become a kind of altar, not to grief, but to grace. A reminder that forgiveness often comes not in sweeping gestures, but in the quiet candlelight of a surrendered heart. And tonight, as he looked toward it, he smiled softly. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "not for fixing it, but for freeing me." Bedtime takeaway. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's laying the burden down where it belongs, in the hands of the shepherd who carries what you no longer need to hold. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. Psalm 3:5. The candle was nearly gone now. Its flame had drawn inward, smaller, more delicate, a tiny heartbeat of light. Thomas didn't blow it out. He let it burn low slowly, reverently, as if it were keeping vigil, as if it, too, understood that this moment was not to be rushed. He folded the blanket over his lap. His Bible lay closed nearby, hands resting atop it, and the silence in the room was no longer an absence. It was a presence, stillness, full of someone. Take a breath. Let it stretch through your chest. The shepherd is here. You don't need to stay awake to be protected. Thomas's eyes grew heavy. He didn't fight the sleep. He didn't resist the closing of the day. He welcomed it, like a friend who had walked the long road with him and now said, "Rest here a while." And as he drifted, he thought of one last thing, not his past, not his worries, not even his body, which had grown slower with time. He thought of Jesus, not in robes or painted halos, but as a watchman, sitting near the edge of the bed, quiet and kind, not speaking, just watching, just staying, because that is what love does. It stays, even when the lights go out, even when no one else is near, even when the soul has nothing left to offer but a final, whispered sigh. Let your breath fall soft now. There is nothing required of you in this moment except to be and to be held. Thomas whispered one final prayer into the dark. Keep watch while I sleep. And though no voice answered, no vision filled the room, peace flooded in. Peace that doesn't explain itself. Peace that simply is. And the shepherd stayed. Through the ticking of the clock, through the quiet ache in old bones, through dreams and deep breathing, he watched. He guarded. He stayed. Bedtime takeaway. God doesn't leave when your eyes close. He sits beside you, quiet, watchful, present. You can sleep safely because he never does. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Lamentations 3:22-23. Dawn came quietly. No fanfare, no alarm. Just the soft unfolding of light pressed gently against the windows, settling over the blankets like mercy. Thomas opened his eyes slowly. He didn't jolt awake anymore. He let the waking come like water rising, soft, gradual, kind. The candle had gone out sometime in the night. All that remained was the faint scent of wax and peace. He lay still for a while, not rushing the moment, just listening to the birds beginning their song, to the creak of the old beams above him, to his own breath, slow and alive. Each inhale felt like a prayer, each exhale like an answer. Pause here, feel your breath. It's not just oxygen, it's grace, given again for one more day. Thomas turned his head toward the window. The sky was soft blue now, with hints of pale pink, the kind of color that couldn't be painted, only received. He whispered, as he often did in the mornings, "You've given me another one." No need to say what. He meant the day, the breath, the stillness, the chance to walk once more beside the shepherd, even if only in prayer. He sat up slowly, his joints reluctant but loyal. The quilt slid from his shoulders. He reached for his slippers, smiling faintly as he did, grateful that even the slow ache of movement meant he was still here, still being carried, still being loved, still being watched over through the night. Let this truth rest in you. Waking up isn't small. It's a gift Another quiet yes from God, that your life is still a story He's telling. Thomas shuffled into the kitchen. The kettle sang softly. The steam rose like incense. He held the mug between his hands again. Warmth, familiar and grounding. He breathed it in and spoke aloud. Whatever this day holds, Lord, thank you that you're in it. He didn't need anything more than that. The peace from the night had followed him into the day, not because he held on to it, but because it had held on to him, and it always would. Bedtime or morning takeaway. If you woke up today, it means mercy found you again. And wherever this day leads, the shepherd has already gone ahead of you. Surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. The sun had fully risen now. Its light filled every corner of the little house, touching the bookshelves, the faded rug, the wooden table where Thomas sat with his tea. There was no grand music, no voice from heaven, just stillness, but not the stillness of absence, the stillness of presence. Thomas had learned over years of living and waiting and praying that peace didn't mean life got easier. It meant you knew who walked with you. And today, that was enough. Pause. Let your own day slow. Even if you're tired, even if the world feels loud, there is peace for you too. Thomas moved through the day slowly. He fed the birds, wrote a note to his daughter, sat beneath the oak tree with his walking stick resting across his knees, and all the while, he whispered small thanks. Thanks for the quiet. Thanks for the shepherd's company. Thanks for the time that remained. He knew his body would one day lay down for the last time. He did not fear it. He did not rush it, because sleep and death were not the end. They were doorways, and Jesus would be on both sides. Let your breath deepen. Let your body soften. You are already safe, already seen, already home in His love. That evening, as the sky dimmed again and the birds quieted, Thomas lit one final candle. He did not speak. He didn't need to. The shepherd was already in the room. And when Thomas finally closed his eyes that night, whether it was for sleep or for eternity, he knew one thing without doubt. He was not alone, not now, not ever. Final bedtime takeaway. The shepherd walks beside you in every breath, in every silence, in life, and even into sleep. You are carried, you are loved, you are His. You've listened well tonight. 4 quiet lives, 4 whispered prayers, and 1 faithful shepherd who never walked away. If your heart still feels heavy, it's okay. You're still loved, still seen, still carried. As you drift into sleep, remember this. You don't need to be strong. You only need to rest. Jesus is here, and He will not let you go. Good night, beloved. You are safe in His arms.